Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to our Hope reading. I think we'll get through 2 chapters today, which will be chapters 12 and 13. We might not quite get through chapter 13, but I think we will. Okay, so let's just get going. Chapter 12. Nira has things to say. As they walked and limped along the trail, the warriors were still in a state of excitement. They had fought a very successful battle, and though most were wounded, their spirits were high. Bon Son was very pleased with the way he had fought. There had always been the nagging question for him as to whether his skills in the tournaments would translate well into combat. On this day, he had proved himself to be a true warrior. Perhaps Hope would show more response to his subtle romantic hints now that she knew what he could do in battle. Most of the men were enjoying whispering among themselves about their various parts in the fight, but Bon Son noticed one thing. Alva's name kept coming up in their whispers. Then somebody came from behind, but Alva appeared out of nowhere to cut him down. Yeah, it felt good when I finally brought my man down till I saw Alva cleave 3 out of the corner of my eye. These comments caused Bon Son's high spirits to turn sour again. Here in his first fight, he had defeated 4 men. This was more than most of the company, but Alva was the hero of the day. He told himself that Alva had more experience in these hills, which was true, but it gave him very little comfort. How could Hope be impressed with his skills when Alva had so far exceeded him? He began to feel sad and bitter. Alva said little about the fight for some time. After a while, he noticed that Hope was silent and seemed uneasy. Such a scene may be great excitement to a group of warriors, but for a sweet girl who had never seen a man die, it would be very disturbing. Alva knew this all too well. Hope, he said gently, I'm sorry you had to see all of that today. We had no choice, but I know it wasn't easy to watch. I've never seen a man die before. I hated it, but I know you were all protecting me. Can't be easy being around a bunch of killers, though, he said, but none of us would ever do anything to hurt you, or any innocent person for that matter. I'm not like Bali, Alva, she said. Then immediately she looked mortified at what she had said. She put her hands over her mouth again and said, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to say that. It's fine, said Alva. No offense taken. What I mean, Hope explained, is that I hate what happened today, but I know that there are evil men who try to do evil things, and good men have to stop them. I would never think less of any of you for that, and I certainly won't be afraid of you for protecting me. You're quite a girl, Alva said. I wonder, said Hope, if you were fair to all women, thinking they would be afraid of you just because one was. Nira said a girl in Bracia was in love with you. Salia, Alva smiled. She'll be a great farmer's wife someday. She's not good enough for you? Hope asked. No, that's not it, Alva replied. I'm not good enough for her. The greatest warrior in the kingdom is not good enough for a barmaid? Ah, the greatest warrior in the kingdom, huh? Alva said with a smile. I'll go with that, I guess. Anyway, killing is necessary at times, but I just realized long ago a nice girl shouldn't have to marry a killer. You aren't a killer, Alva, she said with some intensity. You're a warrior and you protect people, but you are not a killer. Please don't call yourself that. If you say so, Alva replied. Then they walked on in silence. After some time, they found a good place to camp. It was a raised spot to the left of the trail where there was an opening surrounded by thickets. The thickets would provide extra cover for their firelight, and the gravelly ground around the small plateau would make it very hard for anyone to approach without making noise. Alva offered to stand watch. Usually the men took turns so that all of the warriors slept nine nights out of 10. But since Alva was not wounded, he offered to take Philor's watch on this night. They stopped to make camp earlier than usual as the men needed their rest after a day's work. Besides, sometimes they would have to camp when good sights presented themselves on this trail. Now that they had stopped, Hope and Nira checked the wounds they had bandaged earlier. Hope had read every book on healing in Hellel's library, and while she had not practiced it before, it came as natural as everything else did. She had planned to stitch up Pensor's wound when they stopped because it was a very deep gash. However, when she unwrapped it, it looked like she had judged it to be worse than it was. It only seemed a shallow cut now and looked like it would close on its own with little scarring. Pensor had many wounds, and he had many wounds, and he knew that it had been a deep wound that needed to be stitched. How it had gotten so much better so fast, he could only guess. Hope actually found that all the wounds she had dressed earlier looked much better. This gave her much less healing work to do than she had expected, because Philor had fought that day, she offered to cook dinner. She had never cooked before. Nira had always insisted that cooking was not ladies' work. However, she had read books about it and watched Philor often. She felt up to the task and was happy to do something for her heroes. Besides, she had always wanted to try her hand at cooking. She loved eating so much that it seemed like the other side of it must be great fun. As luck would have it, a flock of pheasants had flown overhead earlier, and Chad and Shinar were able to quickly shoot enough for a nice pheasant stew. Hope explored the area a little to find some things to put in the stew, while Nira remained close to her to make sure she stayed safe, and, at Hela's request, they kept within eyesight. Hope had read books on foraging and knew what to look for in this kind of area as well as how to look for it. She had great fun and was able to find some wild onions, garlic, and a few wild potatoes. There were also a few edible herbs in some of the nearby shrubs. With these treasures, Hope returned to camp and set to work. While Hope cooked, the men talked more about the day's battle. Alva sat a ways away, lost in thought. He was thinking about the rest of the journey through the hills and what other dangers they might face. He was also thinking about the journey itself. Why would Hellel want them to escort Hope through a dangerous place like this? Hope was special, that much was clear, but why would she be in any danger in Lassania? She spread joy wherever she went. Why should she be out here? As he was thinking, Nira approached him. She had never approached him before. He turned to her and smiled as she came near. She smiled as well. "You fought very well today, Alva," she said. Continuing to smile, he looked her directly in the eye. "You weren't so bad yourself," he said. "Thank you. You know," he continued, looking in her eyes, "I always thought we would make quite a pair." "Alva, stop!" she snapped suddenly. Alva had never seen her eyes flash, not even when she had stabbed the bandit, but they flashed now. He was very taken aback. He stood there for some time, looking into her serious eyes. Finally, he spoke. "I will. You know, I would have stopped any time you asked me to." "I know that. I'm asking you now." Alva was discomfited and confused. "Alva," Nira said again, "there are 3 things that I need to tell you." "You certainly have my ear." "First," she began, I am very impressed. Second, I am not interested. I understand, he replied, still very confused. Thank you for your clarity. You're welcome, she said, and then began to walk away. Lady Nira, he called after her. She looked back over her shoulder. Yes, she asked. What was the third thing you needed to tell me? Don't be an idiot, she said, then continued to walk away. Okay, Alva said to himself, watching her walk away. He was a little disappointed, but certainly not heartbroken. Mainly, he was very confused. What a strange conversation this had been. Had she been smiling at him lately, or had he missed something? What could this last comment possibly mean? Could it be? No, it couldn't. But what did she mean? As any of them would have guessed, Hope's stew was one of the best meals any of them had ever tasted. The men continued to talk about the battle around the fire, all except Alva and Bonson. Alva was lost in his thoughts while Bonson was stewing in envy and bitterness. Prior noticed that Bonson looked glum and addressed him. You fought quite a battle today, Lord Bonson. Thank you, Bonson replied. It was an honor to fight alongside Prior the Mighty. How many did you get? Prior asked. 4. Same as me, and I've fought in over a dozen battles. You're quite a warrior, my friend. Thank you, Prior. You're a great warrior yourself. Fighting together has a way of nullifying former hostilities among warriors. Thus, Bonson and Prior made the first steps toward friendship. Unfortunately, this does not always work. Just as Bonson's spirits began to rise, Keel asked a question that brought them down again. And how many did you get, Alva? He asked with a grin. I don't know, Alva answered. I don't believe you, Keel said. I'll bet it was at least 20. It couldn't have been half that, Alva said. I thought you didn't know, Keel laughed. So Alva can cut through 10 men like cake after all. I'm pretty sure it was 11, Hope chimed in. This led the men into a long discussion of Alva's skill. Alva was embarrassed, and Bonson was bitter, but the rest of them were quite enjoying themselves. They were more proud of Alva's exploits than they were of their own. Pensor took special satisfaction in all of this. He had known Alva since he was a boy and loved him like a son. He was very glad to see him receive the respect that he felt he deserved. As he looked at Alva, however, he noticed that he seemed more quiet and thoughtful than usual. After everyone else had gone to sleep, Pensor approached Alva as he was standing on his watch. Everything okay, son? He asked. You seemed a little quiet tonight. Yes, I'm fine, he answered. Pensor, has a woman ever told you not to be an idiot? If I had a gold coin for every woman that's told me that, Pensor chuckled, I'd be richer than the Lord Hellel. If I had a gold coin for every time my wives told me that, I'd be richer than Teraphon the Wise himself. They both laughed. Alva, I'm not much of a linguist, but I always remember that your father was fond of teaching us men about different kinds of imperatives so he could tell us what kind of he was using when he'd give us a command. Alva laughed. This was one of his father's idiosyncrasies. He'd used it in raising Alva as well. He did love his imperatives, Alva said. Well, Alva, when a woman tells you not to be an idiot, it's not usually a prohibitive imperative, as if to say, don't be an idiot at some time in the future. No, it's an imperative of cessation, Alva replied. Stop being an idiot. I get that. I assume Lady Nira told you that? Yes. Now I'm trying to figure out what she meant. Well, I guess she means she doesn't go for your flirtation and such. I understand that, but she said she had 3 things to tell me, and that was number 2. The third was, don't be an idiot. Well, said Pincer, I certainly can't think of any other idiotic thing you do. Thanks, Pincer, Alva smiled genially. The thing is, son, you are Alva Danae. If a woman doesn't respond the way you want her to, it means one of 2 things. Either she's a complete fool, or she's wise and has a real good reason. Given that we're talking about Lady Nira, my guess is that it's the second. Sometimes we just gotta cut our losses and move on. Thanks, Pincer. You're always so flattering. If you were only as beautiful as Lady Nira, I'd marry you. Pincer laughed. My wife would have a thing or 2 to say about that, I'm sure. Then Pincer got a look in his eye as if he had some new idea. And what if I were as beautiful as Lady Hope? He asked. We've just left reality, Alva said. Well, said Pincer, you're the Danae. I'd probably best get my beauty sleep. I'll leave you to your mystery. Alva certainly was left with a lot to think about that night. Pincer had known him since he was a boy, so he would always seem young to him. But Alva was not young. He had lived through 40 season changes. What Pincer said may have been a joke, or it may have made sense to him, but objectively, it was certainly a lot of nonsense. Chapter 13, A Cold Night. The next morning, they resumed their journey. For some days, they continued to hike upward toward the plateau. They did not meet with any more trouble for the time being. The last time Alva had passed through, there had not been such big bandit gangs this far south, at least none that he had known of. Smaller gangs would be more hesitant to attack their company, especially if they heard any word of their last battle. They journeyed on in peace, camping at the most convenient locations they could find. Alva had to explain to Hellel that it would take 2 days' journey to cross the plateau. Then they would start their descent. The plateau was mostly rock. Making a fire would be difficult, and hiding it would be impossible. There were always high winds, and it was sure to be bitingly cold, even in early fall. Hellel understood all this. He said that they would carry in wood and brave a fire the one night they had to spend there. Catching colds would be bad on this journey, and it did not sound like a hospitable place for bandits to prowl at any rate, especially not at night. They reached the entry to the plateau in 3 days and made an early camp a few hundred feet from it. They would sleep well and begin crossing it the next day. This would ensure they only had to spend 1 night on it. This was also the site of a clean pool of water. Alva was careful to remind everyone to fill up their canteens. There would be no pools on the plateau. The next day they began their crossing at first light. The wind was blowing strong and cold from the west, and it was chilly even in the sunlight. Luckily, it was blowing at their backs, so it did not sting their faces, and felt like it was speeding them on their way. Everything seemed to be going well until around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, great rain clouds began to appear in the west. These clouds looked like they were preparing a torrential downpour that would hit them in a couple of hours. It looks like Pryor's mountain girl is about ready to give us a big kiss, said Keel. Spending a rainy night on the plateau sounded terrible, but the storm would hit them long before they had time to go back to the beginning and wait for it to pass. The best they could do was to try to keep walking until they found a spot that was slightly more raised than the ground around it. Then they would try to set up their tents before the rain started. They walked about another mile before finding a usable spot. It was not big enough for all of their tents, of course, but they connected Hellel's tent with Nera and hopes to make a large tent that they could all squeeze into. All other tents were used to make a floor to give them some padding from the hard ground. They would need all their blankets for covering in the cold. Making a fire inside the tent was out of the question, and outside it would be put out by the rain. Getting the tent up and making it stay in the high wind was quite a job because the ground was very hard and it was difficult to drive in the pegs. Prior the Mighty managed it with great difficulty. The downpour began just as they finished setting up the tent, and many of the men got soaked to the bone before they were able to scramble inside. The tents were of the highest quality. They were waterproof, but the wind tore through any crevices, and it brought splashes of water with it, getting those near these openings somewhat wet. The wind and the rain were both freezing cold, and twice the door was ripped open by the wind while the rain wet everyone inside before it could be closed again. Cooking was impossible on this night, so their dinner consisted of dried fruit and meat and stale bread. After many mishaps, the tent was able to be secured in a way where the openings would not blow open. But to do this, they had to make the room inside smaller. It was cramped, but at least they could share one another's heat. The donkeys had to be tied and laid inside as well. They were tough, but even they would not survive the freezing torrent outside. While this provided extra heat, they brayed with displeasure at the situation. Though it was cramped inside the tent, everyone was cold and shivering. They were all wet, and drafts continued to blow through, adding to the chill. Before long, it was totally dark inside. When the lightning flashed, it lighted the inside of the tent and made the whole miserable scene visible. "We are all going to die of cold if we don't freeze to death first," Keel said. "I can feel my body going numb." From Hellel's many conversations with Alva, Bonson had guessed it was he who chose their route. "Nice path you chose for us, Alva," he said angrily. We would be dead by now if not for Alva's counsel," Hellel said. "Better to die fighting than freeze to death, I say," Bonson replied. "And Alva's route didn't exactly save us from having to fight." "Alva only provided a suggestion, which he was asked for," Hellel replied. "We came this route by my decision. Drop it, Lord Bonson." Bonson's respect for Hellel kept him from saying another word. "It certainly wasn't Alva's fault," Tombus said slowly. "Nature has a mind of her own, and a man can't predict storms like this. But if we don't do something, we're going to be in serious danger." "There is nothing to do but huddle together and wait it out," said Hellel. This seemed true enough, but it was not satisfactory. All of the company were shivering with cold, and it seemed like some of them might not last the night. The rest would be severely ill the following day. Hope and Nera were the warmest. They had been inside when the rain began and were situated in the middle, far from any spray that made its way in through the crevices, but even they felt the deadly cold. Alva was used to braving extreme elements of nature, but he was soaked to the bone, and even he sensed his danger. "Maybe Hope can sing one of her songs about the sun," Filer said through the chatter. This seemed like a silly suggestion, but the men were desperate, and somehow it seemed like it might help. "Would you sing for us?" Tombus asked. Hope began to sing in the high Lacinian. It was a song she loved about the sun shining down in a meadow full of flowers. At first her voice was soft and shivering, but gradually it became more steady and clear. As she sang, the donkeys stopped their agitated braying and listened. The men closed their eyes. They felt themselves lying in a beautiful meadow of flowers under a warm sun. Gradually, their shivering subsided, and they felt themselves being warmed by the sun. The inside of the tent began to feel warm, and the air seemed clear rather than stuffy. As Hope's song continued, one by one, the men fell into a deep and restful sleep. They had dreams of walking through the meadow in Hope's song and watching her skip and dance through it, or talk to the flowers. Alva awoke the next morning and noticed that the rest of the company was still lost in a deep and peaceful sleep. The storm had passed. It was well into the morning, and the sun was shining high in the sky. Alva hated to disturb the peace of the group, but he knew they must be on their way. Because of the rain, they had not traveled as far over the plateau as they should have on the previous day. They would already get a late start, but the sooner the better. When he woke the rest of the company, they found that they had all rested well, and no one felt the slightest bit sick. "I can't explain it," Pincer said, "but I think our sweet little girl here saved all of our lives. We're all in your debt, Hope." "None of you would have been in any danger if not for me," said Hope. "But take your minds off the cold. We all shared one another's heat. I've read about how people do that to survive the cold." "I think you did a lot more than that," said Pincer, "and all of us would have rather come on this journey with you than do anything else in the world. Thank you again." All the men expressed their thanks. Philor made them a hearty breakfast using many rabbits that Shinar had shot before they entered the plateau, and that had been intended for the night before. Hope helped him so that things would go faster. It was more like a dinner than a breakfast, but everyone was ravenous, so dinner seemed like a good idea. Soon they were on their way again. All of the men were energetic, and all of them were eager to get through the pass so they could see flowers again. Hope's singing had turned these fighting men into nature lovers. I'll see you tomorrow.